Hey, greetings, everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's enjoying life, living life, or loving life. We're going to hopefully show people a little bit of information about how to go about recovering that E state. And as you noticed lately, I've been talking about here a few videos ago, we talked about an equal station in life, and that is what the E state is. It's the equal station in life. And until you learn how to stand up for yourself and use the word of God, you're probably going to have a difficult time. So in the meantime, I'm going to bring some information to help show you how they establish that estate. As we saw in the previous videos, the general journal, where mom has a prenatal record through an obstetrician and then goes to a hospital and creates a medical record there that is entered into a birth log by the birth clerk and consequently entered into an electronic birth record system. So we're going to talk about that as it relates to the estate recovery. And what I'm going to bring you today is the Iowa Estate Recovery Program. Now, every state has to have one of these. This is mandatory federal government regulation that they have to have this. Every state has this, and it's done through the Health and Human Services, which is, of course, directly related to the Social Security Administration as the initial insurance. And again, this is because mom went to the hospital during labor pains, bearing forth a legacy heir, and instead of doing it naturally, she wanted to do it manually, and so she did a registration under a spell of illness, which literally just means an inpatient hospital treatment. It's categorical pretreatment standards, but there's a fundamental difference in nature that creates variances that aren't applicable. They're impossibilities. So we're going to take a look at this. As the Iowa State Recovery Program is stated as law, as we see here, and not policy. Okay, what is the estate recovery law? Now, you're going to find this kind of confusing because it says after the death of a person. But again, a person can never live. A person, whether it be first person, second person, or third person, is a noun. It is only a descriptor of the thing in fact. Period. Nothing more. So the person never lives. So after the death of a person, you have to be able to disqualify that, as I have just here. And you disqualify that again by going back to the origin, which is the general journal, which was a public journal with confidentiality between a private woman and a public officer. That confidentiality was voided, in fact, when it was made a public issue without full disclosure. Who has received Title 19 funded medical assistance. The law requires that the individual's assets be used to provide repayment to the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services. Now, what they've done is they've taken that general journal in confidentiality, created a general ledger, a public issue, to go back to the physical assets for repayment. But again, it's only after the person's death. So if mom is still alive, they have no source to go after the assets, as it would create an undue hardship, while in fact trying to maintain a life in prosperity. Title 19 funded medical assistance includes Medicaid. Everybody is automatically pre-qualified for Medicaid when they're born in a hospital because of the records. That is the qualification, and that qualification says you're a Medicare qualified government employee, which at the time of birth is an impossibility. So they create the enumeration at birth of a Medicare qualified government employee before he could possibly be a Medicaid qualified government employee, and therefore they go to the existing funding, which is mom's asset. And that financial asset, the financial asset, not the physical asset, is the informant statement, the certified statement of live birth that is not certified by the informant, but rather the birth clerk and the county registrar and the State Bureau of Vital Statistics in the state's Department of Health. So mom never qualified the certification. And various waiver programs, including the medically needy program and the elderly waiver program. Physician, heal thyself. You don't need any of their synthetic medicines. You have natural medicinal herbs that are widely abundant. Use them. Recognize the spiritual mother, the Holy Spirit, the spirit of mother that makes you whole. He who is whole is not in need of a physician, but he who is sick. Federal law requires states to have an estate recovery program. In Iowa, the estate recovery program is provided under Iowa code. So it's a code. Federal law requires states to have an estate recovery program that are converted from law to a code, a policy. Federal Acquisitions Regulations 48 CFR 52.212-5. Contract terms and conditions required to implement statutes, executive orders, commercial items, commercial services. Federal law and Iowa State Recovery Program is in fact an acquisition contract. Which means it has to be required. So under that requirement, they do an inquisition, a requisition based upon an inquisition for acquisition. That inquisition is the same thing as an investigation. They're synonymous. So when mom informed them and it created an investment known as an investigation, that was the beginning of an inquisition in a battle of the forms. Investigations. Administrative rules. Administrative rules for estates. And that's what they're doing. Every time you walk into that administrative court, they're following administrative rules that are codified under a contract with federal law. There is no way they can escape it. None. I've said this many times. Those courts are courts of probate estates. Who is affected? Estate recovery affects recipients of Title 19 funded medical assistance who are 55 years of age or older at the time they receive medical assistance, or under the age of 55 and a resident of a care facility who cannot reasonably expect to return home. because you've been obstructed and impeded to believe that you're a resident, facilitating the care of a person who is not, in fact, alive. It has never lived. That's who you need to send home. Then you can return home. You can separate yourself from that statement. It's called the statement of separation, a declaration. I am not of this world. I am in this world. And my spirit is of heaven. What you see before you is the manual transaction. Every breath I take is an act of God, manually expressed in trust of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I don't need your person. Can the repayment be waived? Yes. But the debt is only waived to the extent that collection of the debt will reduce the amount received by the following persons. If there is a surviving spouse, or if there is a child of the recipient who has a disability or is blind or is under the age of 21, or if the collection of the debt would cause undue hardship. The only way that the hardship would be due is if you were under a military jurisdiction of some sort, whereby you would have to follow the demands of the commanding officer. See, I don't follow demands of any man. I follow the command in the scriptures. And they are supposed to follow the same commands. In the military, you have a captain's post. He is the postmaster. He is the master of all things posted in that military regime, that military company. Along with that, they're supposed to have an equal station known as a chaplain's mast. One is a military post, another is a diplomatic post. It's called equal station. And if you're not going to step into the equal station and be diplomatic about it by expressing in beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, then you automatically, by presumption, by your actions of not adhering to His Word and following their word, and all of the jots and tittles added and subtracted, proves that you are able to lie. Therefore, you take on a limited personal liability. Greetings, Reverend Christopher. How you doing today? Reverend Christopher, you unmuted. Talk to us, brother.
Able to hear me now? Okay, we got some feedback. Okay, yeah, I was just working on my software and I saw you were live, so turned you on. Listen while I'm working, as usual. How you doing?
I am well. We're going to go ahead and mute. But feel free to go ahead and unmute when you have something to say. But if we can get the mic fixed, we'd really appreciate that. It's awful hard to have conversation back and forth. So in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and get back to this. Anybody else that wants to, feel free to join the stream, feel free to do so. The link is down there. It's pinned. I want to take a moment to remind everybody to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. If you're on HeckleBus, get over to El Perro and do the same. If you're on El Perro, get over to HeckleBus. Hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And remember, folks, all glory goes to him. There is some PayPal links down below if you want to share some love that way. And in the meantime, I want to welcome everybody: London McLovin, Lightside, JLV, Rodney Kitley, the Agent God, King Morpheus. Greetings. Anybody else that's out there, I can't see you. So just know that I appreciate your support in all forums. And let's get back to it. Because it says, if a debt is waived for a surviving spouse or disabled child, the repayment is due at the time of the person's death, to the extent that he or she had inherited from the medical assistance recipient. Due to the extent that he or she had inherited from the medical assistance recipient. So mom was a medical assistance recipient at the hospital under the initial registration for a spell of illness, inpatient hospital treatment beginning on the first day and not including a prior spell of illness. And during that spell of illness, another life was formed, creating a new spell of illness that was not connected because it was now detached. The cord was severed, and now a new spell of illness where inpatient hospital treatment was served, and that is the inheritance. They're saying that you inherited the life because of medical assistance. And again, that's that informant document known as a certified statement of live birth, wherein the legacy heir coming into the world was not heralded. It was not balanced. It was entered into a general ledger, which is a military ledger constructed from a general journal that supposedly had confidentiality, and through that converted everything to a public issue, is suable. If the debt is waived because there is a child of the recipient under age 21, that the debt is due at the time he or she reaches the age of 21, to the extent that he or she had inherited from the medical assistance recipient. So now they're saying you, upon recipient of that medical assistance, are now the debtor when you turn the age of 21. However, at the age of 14, in midst of the medical or the public education system, the record indicates you are a volunteer if you are a male, a military volunteer at the age of 14. And then upon the age of 18, when you graduate high school, you're told that you need to get a Social Security card. But here it says the debt is waived because there is a child of a recipient under the age of 21, but the debt is due at the time he or she reaches age 21. How is the debt due if they're not knowing that there's a debt? When they signed up for benefits at 18, which would imply that they are taking upon a debt or undertaking a debt. Listen to the terms and words that I use, people. That is an undertaking. If the debt is waived for an undue hardship, the debt is due to the extent that the person received assets of the estate, not the state. Do you get it? If the debt is waived for an undue hardship, the debt is due to the extent that the person that the state created received assets of the estate. If you don't learn how to read, I suggest you quit fucking around with their documents. when the person no longer meets the hardship waiver criteria. Again, the individual's name and number identify the record, which is the personal name. And if the record is being held by the Social Security, when the person no longer meets the hardship waiver criteria because they're the ones stealing from your estate and therefore there is no hardship for them, it's actually placing a hardship on the living being, the living soul, then that living soul needs to learn how to stand up and speak the truth. Or at the time of the person's death. Again, if the person never lived, it cannot die. If a man knows he must die, he knows he must live. Momente vivere, momente mori. What is an estate? For the purposes of the estate recovery program, any estate includes any property, bank accounts, excess funds in a burial trust, or other assets in which the individual had any legal title or interest, including but not limited to jointly held property and interests in trusts, including life estates. An estate does not need to be probated in order for repayment to be made. How will I know how much money is owed to the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services? They aren't owed anything. They have in their possession at the local county registrar the certified statement of live birth. They have that in their records. See if we can pull this out here. I'll be darned. I'll have to find it. I'll have to find it. I've got it somewhere. Excuse me a minute, folks. Okay, well, we'll look for it some other time and do another presentation on it, because I do have, in fact, my companion's birth certificate and certified statement of live birth with 2 receipts, one from the state and one from the county. Okay, the estate recovery program can obtain claim information upon request. If you remember, the other night I did a video, and in it explicitly told us that the beneficiary can request any information that they have in their system. And when you make that request, it's known as obtaining claim information, because they've made a claim already. There's already a claim in, on, and for the record. And that claim for the record is in and on the signatures of the documentations that made a false claim. When inquiring about the payment history, please provide the person's name, birth date, and date of death. When they ask for this date of death, there is no date of death, because it's based upon a date of birth. Now, when things are birthed, that's cargo that's transferred from a dock inland. Cargo doesn't die. It passes away. It either passes this way or that way, depending upon the routing and who's directing it from where to where. So there can be no such thing as a date of death when it comes to a person. They've never lived. Understand how this Babylonian text works and come out of her so you can rebut this shit. Please click on the appropriate form below where you're going to make appropriations. You're not allowed to make appropriations, so you shouldn't be touching these forms. You should be going to the beginning when the Word was with God. All of these forms, those are for uniform commercial codes. The Iowa statutes, known as codes, those are uniform military codes for requisitions of acquisitions through inquisitions. Why do you keep entering in to the inquisition? It's not required. And as long as you keep doing so, they're going to acquisition everything you're willing to give them. Willing to give them. Is it your will or his will? Come out of her. The estate recovery program will then request the claim information. A list of medical assistance provided will then be sent to the person handling the affairs of the deceased. The estate recovery program will then request the claim information. They are holding the information. Do not give them any more. Direct them to their holdings as trustees. You already have it. It's been entered into error. Here's the financial asset proving it was entered into error by an informant and not, in fact, by an agent. Was somebody trading with an enemy? Or are they willing to recognize my mother as the creditor? Because it's only one or the other. You either recognize her as a creditor or you claim that she was an enemy of the state and have thus declared war on a local inhabitant. A list of medical assistance provided will then be sent to the person handling the affairs of the deceased. The decedent is the beneficiary, known individually by the name and number which identifies the record. I am the benefactor. I am the one that's handling the affairs of the deceased, as you call them. I want all of the records removed. Automatic and mandatory declassification for variances of categorical pretreatment standards that are fundamentally different in nature. The estate recovery program does not apply to medical assistance provided prior to July 1st, 1994. So as time goes on, they keep moving these dates up. So a guy like myself supposedly isn't able to acquire what was already there. But we're going to show you something. Or to medical assistance provided after January 1st, 2010 for services under QMB, Qualified Medical Birth, whatever these others are, I don't know yet, programs, also known as Medicare Cost Sharing Benefits. Interest accrues on the debt from 6 months after the death of the recipient. So if the record is the beneficiary and it's the one that's been receiving, and the receiving beneficiary is a decedent, they are in a state of death, even though they have never lived, proving that they took unqualified benefit as if though they were alive, in fact. And that was never so. It is, in fact, an impossibility. I will not stop reiterating the impossibilities left and right. They are all over the place. Just a second. Okay, I'm back. My apologies. I had to take a break there. Let my companion in. Okay, so let's get back to it.
Oh, hey, Keith, I wanted to know if you could hear me now. I changed using my other device.
Awesome. You're coming across much better. Much better.
Okay, yeah. I think I got wax in the other microphone. So go ahead. Thank you, brother.
Awesome. And again, I'll take a short reminder, remind everybody, hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And the StreamYard link is down there below if anybody wants to join. Feel free. Okay, so we know the recipient is now a record, or we now know that the recipient is a record. The individual's name and number identify the record, and that's the beneficiary, and the beneficiary is the one that receives everything. So when you pay your Social Security and FICA at these jobs and everything, it's going to the Social Security Administration, who then makes a claim on that public liability and makes a general deposit in a state trust, an irrevocable trust, a burial trust, so that when the decedent does pass away, all of those claims can be cleared and settled as they belong to the state. In many situations, repayment of medical assistance is handled informally. Not formally, but informally. There is a big difference. Payment can be made directly from the assets. Again, that's why you give a directive, because you want them paid directly from the assets. And in their system, the assets are the papers and not your physical property. However, when an estate is opened in probate, the estate recovery program must be notified. So the first time they charge you with anything in the public after you turn 18, you know, when you go to that Social Security Administration and you fill out that SS5, you are actually the one that's opening a probate estate in that name after it's been enumerated at birth. So now you open the probate estate separate from your mom's. And a claim will be filed. And that's your claim. You made a claim to be a debtor of the United States by filling out an SS5. You or your is a person who owes a debt to the United States. So you willingly walked into the SS5 or Social Security Administration, filled out an SS5 voluntarily, placing your will because you didn't know how to express his will. All glory goes to him, people. You're the one that filed that claim of owing a debt to the United States. Claims request repayment of the medical assistance that has been filed. Claims request repayment of medical assistance that has been provided. Your mom provided medical assistance by providing a medical journal so that eventually got turned into a general ledger for the appropriation of such assistance. Liens are not placed on property. Do you understand that, folks? So all you people using those UCC1s and all those battles of the forum thinking you're going to place liens. You're going to end up with 30, 40, 50 years in prison, you dumb motherfuckers. Liens are not placed on property. Although the fair market value of the property is considered a recoverable asset. You cannot go after the property. You go after the value that you have an interest in.
Okay. Is this because their definition of property is the right of use of a thing? Is that why we're
correct? And the right of
that's
the
right.
use of the thing is the paper that they use for their records. And that property is nothing but the United States record. And that's all the United States is a record kept in paper form that is then converted to an electronic form. And it's all from a birth registration meant to be enumerated so that it can be kept track of throughout its life, eventually being archived into the National Archives. I'm not a national. Get that information off of the record.
So what, those who've done UCC filings, they should then rescind those in order to avoid issues in the future?
That's up to them. It is my opinion that you're not supposed to be touching them according to the way the law is written. You are not, in fact, a federal, state, or municipal officer or agent whose residence presence is deemed necessary to perform obligations of duty of those public liabilities. The beneficiary is not required to do anything. In trust law, the beneficiary is not required to do anything. And if I was born of my mother and I'm the beneficiary, benefactor, however you want to state it, then how is anybody able to stand up and say, well, now you're a trustee, now you have to? Well, if I'm a trustee of God, because I fear not, for I have been redeemed. He's called me by thy name. I am his. So who the fuck are you trying to administrate his property? You want to call me a trustee? You better step up as a trustee as his as well. Otherwise, you ain't shit. And that's as simple as it gets.
Our concern is for those who have done in error these types of filings being misled by the wrong thinking. There's some concern for them, and perhaps what would be the process for them to rescind if they were to accept your understanding of it?
That's the definition of accident as it appears in Title 49 of the United States Code. Accident means continuous and repeated exposure to the same conditions causing a public liability that the insured never intended or expected. My apologies. I repent. I will never enter data elements into your record again. I will always communicate privately, and that's the best I can do. It's an impossibility for me to be operating in an administrative situation that I'm not part of. I cannot help you administrate. I can only do as I'm commanded by my word, the word that passes through me from a greater source.
Is it not also some type of a copyright violation to be in use of that code without permission of the copyrighted owner?
They can't prove copyright. Copyright, if you look at copyright laws and look at the copyright that I've got on my page, the first home page, it's the copyright of the UPU. And if you guys learn to comprehend what a copyright is, it's a disclaimer. It's disclaiming any liability because you really don't know if what you're saying is true or not. You can only place material facts, and those material facts are things that you got from another source.
Okay.
You can't claim liability for another source, but you can claim a source, and everybody else can try to prove that it's a lie. But how are they going to do that when they agree with it? That's why you put them into agreement. Do you or do you not admit that your mom gave birth to you? Yes. So if your mom gave birth, she was the grantor in earth, correct? Yeah. So why are you listening to all these other fools? Aren't you the beneficiary of the grant? See, in trust law, trust shall not fail for want of trustee. So fuck all you trustees. I'm the benefactor of the grantor. my mom. And your
So
communication, your
minus the
communication,
UCC. Go ahead. Excuse me.
Your communications are the interruptions and obstruction of being able to live peacefully in prosperity and abundance. It calls for automatic and immediate mandatory declassification. It's a lie. That whole record is a lie. Prove that it's not. I can prove that it is. Show me how that's true.
If someone is having a security interest in some kind of an asset, what would be your suggestion for them being able to prove that they are indeed holding the higher interest in the asset?
That's what I'm working on. Like I said, that birth certificate and the certificate of live birth, the statement of live birth from the county. You get both of those. I ordered the one from the state and the county. And so what they did was it's done through the state. You make the request through the state. You do not call the county. You make the request for both records from the state. The state will communicate with the county where you were born and order them to issue that statement of live birth. You will get a receipt from the state for $25, and you will get a duplicate receipt from the county for $25. That's proving that there's a financial transaction in there. You paid for it, and it was done under an order because you ordered it. And you gave it a direction, which is the addressing. So now you've got a direct order for payment because you've got the original financing asset and the certificate that's up for sale. So what you do now, you can turn around and place your name, place the evidence, the material facts that you are in fact the creditor, and you're going to loan the money to the nation, and you can determine that value yourself.
What kind of money are we going to loan to the nation? Is it going to be money of weight and measure?
Money of credit. It's equivalent.
Okay, so like credits on account, which we end up being the grantor of the. Yes.
Got it. Now you're going to grant them credits on the account, and you become the grantor, which is the true liable party, because you have to stick to your word. A man is bound by his word. So if you're the liable party and they're the beneficiary, and the beneficiary is not allowed or required to do anything, are they allowed to go against the liable party, who is in fact the grantor?
No.
Exactly. See how that works?
Yeah.
See, when you go against God, you become the demon, and everybody sees you as a demon. Very well. Very well. So let's go back to it. Finish up here, and then we've got another page we're going to go over. It says, before payment is provided to the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services, assets should be used to pay for burial expenses. Before payment is provided to the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services, assets should be used to pay for funeral and burial expenses, medical bills of last illness, legal fees, and other costs of settling the affairs of the deceased. So before the payment, the assets are used. Again, that asset is the certified statement of live birth known as the informant and her signature on that original financing document, a document of title. Expenses incidental to transfer of title to the Postal Service. All the way up the chain. And that's because they initiated a funeral and burial expenses trust. It's a burial trust. Repayment of the medical assistance is made from the assets that remain. They're the main assets, and you have to go back to them. The remainder, repayment of medical assistance that says repayment. So payment is already had.
Was that because there was a hypothetical purchase of the labor?
Correct. And that's the hypothecation of a customer's security interest. They converted it from a general journal that shouldn't have been a general journal. It should have been completely private. They keep their record. Mom keeps her record. The problem was mom wasn't keeping record. She wasn't keeping with the word of God. So repayment, because the payment's already been made of the medical assistance, is made from the assets that remain because they were the main payment. The order in which payment is to be made is listed in Iowa Code. The order in which payment. See the ambiguity? See how they do that? Repayment of medical assistance made from the assets that remain. The order in which payment is made, telling you that payment, again, has already been made. Okay? And we're going to show you. It's because of all the medical bills, legal fees, and burial expenses and all that. They've already been taken care of. It's already been established as an irrevocable burial trust. Irrevocable burial trust. Payment can be made in the form of personal check, money order, or cashier's check. Notice on every check, it says paid to the order of. Therefore, it's the same thing as a money order. It's synonymous. You see what they're doing here? They're giving you different ways of payment. When again, the payment's already been made and we're in the process of a repayment. So they should be issuing you a check that you can then lend unto the nation, establishing that you're giving credit to them. And holding.
And then that would keep us out of the corporate double taxation scheme that they keep trying to involve us.
Because now you hold an equal station in life because they accept you as the creditor because the record says so. What about burial trusts? Under Iowa Code Chapter 523A.303, the seller of a burial contract, that's the birth clerk. She took a birth enumeration and registered it for birth certificate sales. That's the seller of a burial contract. The funeral director or banker, the clerk, the birth clerk, is the original banker that initialed the burial contract, is required to contact the estate recovery program when there are funds remaining in a medical assistance recipient's non-guaranteed, irrevocable burial trust fund after the funeral and burial expenses have been paid. Again, they've already established it and paid it through the seller of the burial contract. The burial contract is the birth certificate showing that there's a general ledger. That's the initiation of a burial contract. It's meant so that when the death certificate is received, it's entered into the National Archives. It's no longer contractable. It's full. You can't squish it down into any smaller parts. You can't contract it down. It's got full information when it shouldn't. You've engorged that pig of a person, given away everything. He's a respecter of no persons. I don't know why you guys don't understand this. If you're so scriptural and so spiritual and so Christian-like, it doesn't make sense. It tells me you're so concerned about their words that you're forgetting to read the words that he implanted in your heart. So the estate recovery program then has 60 days in which to inform the seller if those funds are to be paid by the Iowa or to the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services, or if they may be paid to the next of kin. So they recognize who the payment is supposed to go to. Let them know that you have an equal station in life and that the record is in fact wrong and all payments need to be repaid back to the next of kin because mom is no longer around. Or if mom's around, then you go to her estate and you collect all of the estate probate from her mom. You get it?
That's a generation skipping trust that you're speaking of?
Bingo. Bingo. Somebody's paying attention. It's the generation skipping trust. It's already paid. Not only is it already paid, but you've been duped into paying it again and again and again and again.
That's because they presume to be pagans. That's just a joke.
Pagans, pay gains. They're the ones getting the gains off the payment. You don't recognize you've already fucking paid. Okay, if an estate is open in probate, the excess burial trust. So the estate is, or if an estate is open in probate, it wasn't opened in trust, it was opened in probate. In fact, it shows it on the court. It's administrated in probate. So it is the excess burial trust funds are to be paid, to be, meaning they haven't been paid to the estate yet, to be paid to the estate. And again, you, yourself, the living flesh and blood, Eucharist, Christ being, is the estate. You have an equal station in life, not in probate. What about life insurance policies? Proceeds from life insurance policies are generally considered the assets of the named beneficiaries. Proceeds from life insurance policies are generally considered, that's the consideration. It's a military consideration. Generally considered the assets of the named beneficiaries. The name and number identify the record. The record identifies the beneficiary. You are the benefactor to the beneficiary and therefore not reported, or excuse me, the assets of the named beneficiaries. The asset is the paperwork. So when you go back to the original document that started it, she is the grantor of all of that paperwork. She is.
So are you saying that a beneficiary is then an account?
Yes, and she is the grantor of the assets, and the assets are the data elements as set into that record.
Okay.
And again, they were as set into that record because it was granted by mom. Whether you want to call her an informant or a recipient or whatever, she gave you those data elements. That's a grant. She didn't charge you for them. She gave them to you. So why are you charging her or the beneficiary? That's a false totem trust. However, proceeds are considered recoverable after high priority expenses are paid when an insurance policy is assigned to a funeral home or when the policy had a cash value that was not reported to the department and would have made the Medicaid recipient ineligible. I am not, in fact, a Medicare qualified government employee, and as the record reflects, it established that recording and the qualification at the birth enumeration. The generation of an insurance policy. It is not law. Therefore, the recipient is ineligible at law because he exists in law and shouldn't have been entering into the legal system. What about Miller trusts? Most Medicaid recipients do not have a medical assistance income trust. Really? Do you see what's happening here? Medical assistance income trust. Most Medicaid recipients do not have one. They may have a burial trust, an irrevocable burial trust. But everything under that administration listed as income is for them. That's their medical assistance income trust, not yours. You are not part of that. They are taking advantage of the burial trust that you hold irrevocably, but don't know it. And you're handing them data elements according to that for their medical assistance income trust. These trusts are not part of the estate and must not be used to pay estate expenses. Those medical assistance income trusts are much like a lawyer's investment trust. Residual funds from such trusts are received by the estate recovery program. Residual. Does that look somewhat similar to resident? And must be made payable to the Iowa Department of Health and Human Services according to the terms of a trust in Iowa Code Chapter 633C, wherein everybody keeps committing themselves or admitting themselves or whatever that they're a resident and that they're providing income residually. What about annuities? Annuities are subject to estate recovery to the extent that the decedent had an interest in the annuity at the time of death. An annuity is an investment and is not treated like life insurance. See the difference? They're saying life insurance is not an investment. Excuse me. It is an investment, but as it says here, an annuity is not an investment and is not treated like life insurance. They are in fact the same thing, but there's a categorical pre-treatment standard that is different. And I'll not stop hollering about that. Variances for categorical pre-treatment standards that are fundamentally different in nature. Very simple statement. You learn the importance of that statement, and you can rebut every record there is by qualifying the variance. I'm sorry, I'm not under that jurisdiction. My jurisdiction is that of our Father which art in heaven. I am sent heavenly, spiritually, to operate the manual presence that you see before you. No one else has that authority. Your authority is over the person, which is the paperwork that I produce. If I do so under your administrative capacities, it's only because I grant you that administrative capacity. An annuity, remaining payments must be considered an asset of the estate for estate recovery purposes. Recovery, as we end this page, is because they uncovered something. And now you're going to recover it. You're going to protect it because it's been unprotected all of your life and they've come after you for it. I hope this is making sense.
Makes a lot of sense to me, Keith. Thanks for making more sense out of it. I appreciate that.
All right, the next one we're going to go to is the Iowa Code. And like I said, this is stuff that exists in every state. Every state, there's a federal law that says every state has to codify it. And under that codification, they then pass the book on to the administration. So under the administrative code, which is Uniform Commercial Code, known as statutes, which are uniform contracts between the federal government executive orders and state statutes for acquisitions of property, and their property is nothing but the paperwork. Classification of debts and charges. So again, there's a predetermined classification that is at variance for the standards that are fundamentally different in nature. Notice I can say that same thing many different ways. Classification of debts and charges in any estate in which the assets are or appear to be insufficient to pay in full all debts and charges of the estate. The personal representative shall classify the debts and charges as follows. Court costs. Sorry, they've already been paid. The asset that mom gave was a prepayment for that which I'm asking for repayment now. Stating that in between, the payment was already had. you already have payment as evidenced by the record because mom granted it. She granted the initial financial asset so that the credits could be entered in an electronic book entry system and then circulate from there. They are still in circulation. Other costs of administration, telling us court costs are an administrative cost. Reasonable funeral and burial expenses. Reasonable having already been paid. And how do we know that? Because the estate recovery program tells you that there's an irrevocable burial trust established in the recording. All debts and taxes having preference under the laws of the United States, not the state. All debts and taxes having preference under the laws of the United States. And again, the state ceded their jurisdiction to the United States, showing in, on, and for their own record that they too have a preference to be administrated and have thus been administrated executively under the laws of the United States through the Federal Acquisitions Regulations 48 CFR 52.212-5, stating that all of those statutes are in fact contracts. Reasonable and necessary medical and hospital expenses of the last illness of the decedent. And again, if it was hospital expenses and you were an inpatient, it's known as a spell of illness. And it needs to be respelled because the spelling they use is not concise and in the order in which it in fact did happen. They're missing and omitting things. So you need to place those things supplementally on top of the record because they're underlying, they're latent, they haven't been exposed. That's the underlying of the undertaking of the burial trust. All taxes having preference under the laws of this state. And again, if they ceded their jurisdiction, even their tax preference is that of the tax preference of the United States. Any debt for medical assistance paid pursuant to section 249A.5 subsection 2. All debts owing to employees. See who the debt is supposedly owed to? The employees for labor performed during the next 90 days next preceding the death of the decedent. The entry of the record was the entry of a decedent. The person is in fact a decedent. So if the death of the decedent is a requirement, then merely the evidence placed into the record of a decedent would prove that there has been a death. Again, it doesn't have to prove that there was a life, merely the presumption of a death in context, because now they've attached it the death of a decedent. And again, the decedent never had life. So merely entering that death record into the public record is the issue. It professed that the living being never actually lived. So again, momente mori, momente vivere. If one knows they must die, then they too know they must live.
Well, then what's a survivor?
Survivor, the one that lives in the surname. Again, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by thy name. Thou art mine. That's Isaiah 43:1. 44:5 in that same book reaffirms it. One shall say, I am the Lord's. One shall call himself by the name Jacob, and another shall subscribe with his hand unto the Lord, and surname himself by the name of Israel. So again, the spirit is Jacob. The man is Israel. The man is the one that can physically subscribe with his hand unto the Lord. The spirit is the one that can call himself by Jacob and compare it in equal station in life to the given name Keith. And manually, I've been signing my name Keith Orland Little all my life, or Keith Little all my life. From now on, it will be Israel, accommodation or for accommodation of Israel by Jacob. For I am the Lord's, and he granted everything we have. Do you or do you not agree?
Absolutely.
All unpaid support payments as defined in section 598.1 subsection 9, and all additional unpaid awards and judgments against the decedent in any dissolution, separate maintenance, uniform support, or paternity action. The general ledger is the paternity action that was converted, hypothecated to a general ledger. And that's what we've got to go back to, in my opinion. Go get that certified statement of live birth and know that it's the asset, and show them how everything extended from that. And the information on there was given by your mother. And you are the beneficiary. The beneficiary not being required to do anything, and the trust shall not fail for want of trustee, tells me that between myself, my mother, and our Father which art in heaven, I am the Son, my mother is the Holy Spirit, and he is our Father which art in heaven. Fuck off. You ain't got nothing to do with us. You have to do with a fictional person created as a decedent that never lived and never will. Fix your records. And everything you've taken from me during my lifetime as a living soul is to be given back and made me whole. That includes a house, car, the credit to obtain any other further things that I might want or acquire or need in redemption of the land or my brothers. Because that's what I am. I'm not here to do anything but redeem the land and my brother who is waxing and poor and has sold off his shit. Because now I know how it was sold off, and it's false. Give back. It's mine, not yours. That simple.
Keith, are you aware of? I'm not certain that it's. They don't think they do this anymore, but in the hospitals, it used to be customary for the nurse to put drops of silver nitrate in the eyes of the infant.
Yep.
And that was a claim that, so that no infection would come.
Yep.
My opinion is that that was an ecclesiastical ritual of putting coins on the eyes, metaphorically,
Yep.
and a hidden ecclesiastical ritual that the nurse would not be made privy to.
Right.
Is that? Yeah. I believe that's the ritual that created the fictional entity, right?
Yep. Water. The Spirit of God moves upon the face of the waters, and the only part of your body that has open air access to water is your eyes. Everything else is.
And that silver nitrate is a derivative of gold. So the AU, all that AU, right? It was
AUTHOR, a Nordic god. Eyes,
yes.
author eyes.
There you go.
The
I'm just
eyes,
bringing these things out for the other folks to realize that there's ritual behind all of the creation of these things.
There's many things that people don't understand that they're following that have been instituted eons ago, and it's very select few that realize that and are able to come out of it, and the rest of them are completely indoctrinated. And as time goes on and we get greater and greater technologies, we become more and more indoctrinated because it happens that much quicker.
Now, there was something about that the estate is given the ferryman, and then at the time that the person becomes the man or woman becomes cognizant of what they're doing, they can pay a fee to have their property returned.
Correct. And that
it was like $10 or something.
Well, the fee again is the correction of the record, where you're going to give all of that back to the United States, proving that you're the creditor, and therefore all of that you've done through your life that gets reimbursed as payment to the recipient, you put back into their system. You don't want all the excess. You only go through life getting what you need in life. So when you need a car, all you have to do is issue an order for deposit or for transfer of credit so you can obtain that automobile. The credits are already there, and it's already recognized, a foreign money country judgment. So let me finish the last part here, and then we're pretty much about done. Because that or paternity action, again, all these others are in form some kind of action, but it's related to the paperwork. But the paternity action itself was when mom initially went to the doctor when she conceived and passed that conception on to him for his perception. And his perception was then logged into his record, a conversion. Should never happen, folks. You do not need military medical assistance for giving birth. What you need to do is learn how to have your children bear your children naturally. Bear your children naturally. The Second Amendment, you do not have a right to bear arms. You have a right to an armorial bearing. And that armorial bearing is screwed up because instead of bearing the legacy heir and heralding the forthcoming of that legacy heir, you go to a doctor and make it a public issue that has confidentiality and says, oh, no, we're going to keep that secret. I'm going to speak boldly as I ought to. And to the extent that the supplemental porting, all support is a portal. That is a posting. You have to quit it. If you're going to support something, support the Word of God. Import the supplemental Word of God. Export the supplemental words of God. Do not add unto or take away from, not one jot nor one tittle, lest ye be found a liar. The paternity action when mom goes to the hospital upon conception is the lie. You are saying you need the assistance, the medical assistance.
Does not the record start at the prenatal?
Yes. The prenatal record when mom goes to the doctor to make sure that she is of conception. That is taken and converted for his perception. A doctor who took a Hippocratic oath to Apollo and the Greek gods rather than mom's Christian God. creating a multiple personality that is then disarrayed and disordered because mom didn't know how to put her personalities and keep them in order. To the extent she extended them to a doctor in confidentiality, saying she was going to keep things secret. You don't keep your conception secret. You let the world know that there has been a union, two have become one in a covenant under God, bringing two nations together, and they have consummated a living soul within a womb that is now rendering a greatness unto mankind. A ward, a steward, not a ward, but a steward. And judgments have accrued at the time of death of the decedent. And so when that record is entered as a decedent, things accrue pursuant to their judgments, wherein they give awards to people that support them to the extent of the actions of that original paternity. And that support is by the uniform for maintenance and dissolution between the decedent and the living soul. Learn how to read this English language, and you're going to further yourself. Again, I urge everybody, quit believing what's put before you.
So what's that decedent? Is that a decedent? Is that of a seed contract?
Yes, the states ceded their jurisdiction, so they deceded themselves. Now they are a decedent. You do the same thing in that corporate action as a mom and dad by entering that documentation into that record. You create a decedent situation, a decedent event, saying that you are ceding your jurisdiction, your spiritual jurisdiction, to a manual jurisdiction that is a vital statistic jurisdiction, saying that you need them. It's vital for you to be able to live in order to make that, by making that conversion. And that's false. You lied. You don't need that paperwork. You believe you do, but you don't. You don't need a single thing. You don't need the ink that passes through the eye of a needle in a pen. You don't need that. You can pass through the eye of the needle with your spoken word. They're attempting to pass through the eye of the needle by using an ink pen as the needle. Ink is the most sought after element in the world. It is the creation of every contract. Do you need ink? I don't. I use the ink that's already been used. Why do you need to keep printing shit up? Don't we have enough information already? I think it's important people learn that. And I hope you do. The man is bound by his words. He doesn't need to write it down. He spake, and it stood fast. Now time. Prove your standing. Yes, white pirate sought after squid ink. I'm going to come back later. I hope I can get a hold of him. I've got a buddy named Ira Wolf, and I hope I can do a stream with him. I'm going to have him come up, and we're going to talk about parlay. See, that's the whole issue. See, everybody's voting for the wrong person. That's what a parlay is. So anyway, I'm done for today. On the way out, I hope everybody hits that like, share, and subscribe button. Please feel free to hit that love button. PayPal, share some love. I don't have it all figured out yet, so I still have a necessity for that money. And it sucks sitting here starving because everybody wants the information, but they don't want to give equal consideration. So every little bit helps, 10, 15, 20 bucks. feel free to hit that share button. In the meantime, remember, folks, I love you. Moonbug, Bear Jew, NG Jeep Girl, Jen, Salty Siren, Mark Jones, Enrique, Rodney Kitley, the Serpent God, King Morpheus, Lightside, London McBelvin. Share this information out. Learn how to do your estate recovery. You are the estate, and you need to recover yourself. You need to protect yourself. So therefore, I tell you to put on the full armor of God. Learn how to minister his gospel as a prophet unto the nations, because he sanctified you. He ordained you. He's the one that knew you before you were cast forth from that womb. And he's the one that wrote his word on you, on your heart in that womb, before he formed you in that belly. So think about this stuff. And remember, folks, I love you. I don't give a shit whether you love me back or not. God bless and have a good day.
All right. Be well, Keith.